Welcome in. Week 10's Red Stinker Tinker. We are pre-recording this. We're going to be out of town traveling, but I thought you get an opportunity to still take a listen, watch on YouTube here. Let's jump right in. Top quarterback of the week. We're going Kyler Murray. You heard it on Red Six Pack on the Friday edition of the Rumbles of Red, and I'm doubling down here. I love me some Kyler Murray this week. The quarterback one and quarterback two from last week face off this week is Murray versus Josh Allen. They're going to look to trade blows with their legs and their arms this week. Should be a fun game there in Arizona. Top 12 quarterback this week. So this is a quarterback we're looking to potentially stream if we need to. Maybe we don't have Patrick Mahomes, Matt Ryan this week. You probably weren't playing the Fighting Gary Gilbert. So those are probably your only two guys that you're looking to stream for this week. And we're going to go Baker Mayfield. Quarterback 26 on the season. I hear all the doubters. Ending up as quarterback 12, a top 12 quarterback this week could be a stretch, but I do think he's streamable against a Houston defense, the same defense that gave up a top 15 position of quarterback to Jake Luton last week. He should have Nick Chubb back this week as well, which will help in the run game and hopefully open up that play action pass. Look for Baker Mayfield to end up around that top 12 quarterback this week. At running back, Aaron Jones. He's top 10 on the season. He's against a Jacksonville Jaguars defense that is very poor. Another week back from injury. Remember, he was activated last week before the Thursday night game, but now he's had 10 days to prepare for this week. For him to get a couple breakaway runs, get out there about 125 yards, maybe a touchdown or two this week, as I think Green Bay handily beats Jacksonville Jaguars. A top 24 running back on the week, J.D. McKissic. If you're in a PPR league, he is a running back two this week. Alex Smith is the quarterback. He's going to be the quarterback moving forward. The talent isn't there with Alex Smith anymore. He's older. He's come back from that terrible injury. The talent isn't quite there as much anymore, but he's a very, very smart quarterback. And how do you avoid getting hit? How do you avoid getting knocked down every time you dump it off to your running back? And J.D. McKissic is that guy right now in Washington. He is their third down and passing down running back. Last week, J.D. McKissic ended as a running back 3, 9 catches on the week. Last week, 70% of running backs who had at least 40 catches gave you double-digit fantasy points. J.D. McKissic's volume in that passing game makes him a running back 2 on the week. And on top of all those stats, he gets to play the Lions. Yeah, the Detroit Lions, the same Detroit Lions that gave up 2 top 6 running backs 2 weeks ago. And then last week, they give up 206 rushing yards to Dalvin Cook. J.D. McKissic can easily be in your starting lineup this week, and you shouldn't feel any sweat there. Top wide receiver, we got a lot of great wide receivers this season. There's a lot of them out there that could easily end up as your number 1 wide receiver. But I'm going to go Keenan Allen. He's been a top 5 wide receiver over the past 2 weeks. His production continues to improve week in and week out with Justin Herbert. In fact, he's scored more fantasy points each week over the last 4 weeks. Last week, he ends up with 16.3 PPR fantasy points. So if that trend continues, that he continues to score more each week, maybe he gets you to 20 points this week, ends up as the wide receiver 1 on the week. Top 24 wide receiver, somebody, maybe you're looking to fill in for Tyreek Hill, Chris Godwin, Julio Jones. You're trying to find who can I put in there this week. I'm going to go DJ Chark. He's wide receiver 30 on the season, and he hasn't been what we've been looking for this season. That's not really what we hoped for when you drafted him back in August. Very up and down. We battled some injury early in the season. But in his first game with Jake Luton, he performed really well and had 12 targets. DJ Chark needs to be in your lineup this week, as really the Jaguars should be trailing the Packers most of the game. Therefore, Luton will be throwing a lot, and if DJ Chark can get that double-digit targets once again, he should end up as a top 24 wide receiver on the week. All right, tight end, this crapshoot. There's no George Kittle due to injury. Travis Kelce's on a bye week. We don't have any layups this week with our tight ends like we usually do. Therefore, really your guess is as good as mine. Who's going to end up as the best tight end of the week for fantasy? But I'm going to go with our guy TJ Hawkinson, the number 2 tight end behind Travis Kelce since week 7. He's becoming a very consistent target for Matthew Stafford, and most specifically, a target in the end zone. His end zone targets have paid off multiple times over the past 5 games. In fact, he's found pay dirt 4 times over the past 5 games. He's also hit double-digit fantasy points in PPR formats all of his games except for 2 games, which he scored at least 9 points in both of those games. So a super high floor for TJ Hawkinson. I would call him the second most consistent tight end on the year behind Travis Kelce. Give me TJ Hawkinson as our top tight end of this week. And a top 12 tight end this week, I'm going Austin Hooper. Hooper is coming off of an injury, plus they had a bye last week for the Browns. So he could easily be forgotten at tight end. He could even be on your waiver wire currently. Remember, there's no more OBJ right now in Cleveland. Look for Austin Hooper to really take over those targets that Harrison Bryant and David Njoku was getting during Hooper's absence. Hooper should easily be in your starting lineup this week at tight end. Only guys I would like more than him right now is, Hawkinson, Waller. You're probably still going to play Mark Andrews, Jimmy Graham. There's not a lot of names, though, that I would be starting over Austin Hooper this week. He should be in your starting lineup as a tight end 1 in week 10. The give me all of that game of the week. We're going Arizona Cardinals versus Buffalo Bills. I already talked about the 2 top quarterbacks from last week facing off against each other this week. And if you have a player in on one of these 2 teams, most likely they need to be in your lineup this week, unless that player plays tight end or running back. Both quarterbacks are obviously going to be starting them this week. Wide receivers, DeAndre Hopkins, Christian Kirk. He's a wide receiver 2 flex play again. Stephon Diggs for Buffalo. John Brown looked great in his first game back last week. He's a flex play, and even Gabriel Davis can be a flex play this week. And you don't even have to be desperate to put him out there. But if you are desperate, make sure that he's a guy that you could be playing this week. Kenyon Drake or Chase Edmonds, depending on what Kenyon Drake's health is. Remember, I'm pre-recording it. It's Thursday here, but I'm not putting this out till Sunday morning. So we're going to know more by the time you're listening to this, whether or not Kenyon Drake is playing this week. If Drake's playing, I'm starting Drake. If not, I am starting. And then on the other side, Zach Moss, he can be started again. Buffalo's putting enough points and getting enough goal line work for Zach Moss to be a RB2 flex play each week. I don't like tight ends for either one of these 2 teams. They're throwing it to every tight end they can find. Max Williams, Dawson Knox, and Darnell Daniels, just a bunch of names that are not going to be tight end 1 worthy, at least definitely not safe plays. I'm going to avoid the tight ends this week. Should be a really fun shootout game. Should be a fun game to watch. Arizona versus Buffalo, give me all of that. On the other end, don't like that. That's going to be the Patriots versus the Ravens. The Ravens defense, they're legit, and they're getting better every week. And I don't really want to see any Patriots on my team this week. We saw a great fantasy game by the Patriots last week. Jacoby Myers has a little breakout week. Damian Harris does well, but he gets hurt. Rex Burkhead looks awesome running the ball in, shifting it around. Cam Newton gets 2 rushing touchdowns. The Patriots overall had a pretty solid fantasy week last week on Monday Night Football, but we need to lower those expectations tremendously. That Lamar and Hollywood Brown can do the same thing. But for me, that's nothing more than a prayer. I'm not expecting it. There's safer wide receivers out there to play this week. And there's probably safer quarterbacks to play this week as well. My assumption you're starting Lamar Jackson. It's really going to be hard not to start Lamar Jackson. But I like Justin Herbert, Jared Goff, even Big Ben more than I like Lamar Jackson this week. New England Patriots versus Baltimore Ravens on Sunday Night Football. Don't like that for fantasy. You snooze, you lose. Player of the week, Devontae Parker, currently being started in 30% of fantasy leagues. He goes 6 for 64 last week on 7 targets. The Chargers are giving up above league average fantasy points to wide receivers in 50% of the games they've played so far. And last week, the Chargers looked good, right? They didn't give up many points to the Raiders wide receivers. Aguilar has a good game, but Henry Ruggs is shut down. But the Raiders to continue to build and mold into a phenomenal fantasy relevant hookup moving forward. I think Devontae Parker should be a low-end wide receiver 2 this week. Definitely worth a flex consideration for your team. Devontae Parker, you snooze, you lose. Our hit it and quit it of the week is Duke Johnson. David Johnson looks like he's probably going to be out this week, but make sure this is contingent on David Johnson missing the game. Again, I'll remind you, I'm pre-recording it. So if David Johnson misses the game, Duke Johnson's our hit and quit of the week. You heard great stats from the Dial with Kyle on Friday's episode about Duke Johnson. The Browns defense is a very exposable defense for running backs. A great fill-in for David Johnson this week. And if you have guys like Clyde or Todd Gurley or Zeke on bye week, try to get Duke Johnson into your lineup this week. You're going to enjoy what you get out of him. He's going to put up double-digit fantasy points for you this week. Duke Johnson, hit it and quit it. Our coulda, woulda, shoulda this week, Allen Lazard. A guy that I absolutely loved in the preseason. I talked about him a little bit on Tuesday. He was drafted as a late-round flyer. See what happens. Can he be the wide receiver 2 in Green Bay? He's coming off IR, and he should be able to play in Week 10. Keep an eye out. Again, make sure he's actually going to be playing this week if you want to go ahead and start him. I would avoid starting him. But as you know, our coulda, woulda, shoulda, these are guys that are owned in less than 50% of leagues that we want to get on our roster now. Because if Lazard plays this week, he could very easily show up as the wide receiver 2 in a hurry. Therefore, he could be a hot waiver wire addition next week. We want to get out ahead of that. Go get him now. Put him on the end of your bench right now. Let's see what happens this week against the Jacksonville Jaguars there. Aaron Rodgers is a good enough quarterback, obviously. He's throwing the ball enough that he can make Allen Lazard a fantasy-relevant wide receiver 2 for the rest of the season. And I think a week or two on your bench could show you that this guy's going to be very relevant for you in the playoffs. Look, I'd rather have a flyer coming off IR like Allen Lazard on my bench rather than having guys that we've been sitting around waiting on all season like Hollywood Brown and Darius Slayton and T.Y. Hilton. Those guys we've been waiting on. Why do we continue to wait on these guys? They're not producing, and they're definitely not in our starting lineup. So let's put a guy that we don't know yet. But what we do know is the talent is there with Allen Lazard. Allen Lazard coulda, woulda, shoulda. Go ahead and find him on your waiver wires right now and put him at the end of your bench. Fallback boy of the week, Cam Newton, coming off a great fantasy outing last week against the Jets. That's who he played. Let's not forget that bad defense was who he played. Ended up as quarterback 8 on the week, and he's probably sitting on your bench last week because you didn't see much from him before that. Maybe he's sitting on your bench. He's got the big name with Cam Newton. You're looking like, oh, let's cash in on this. He's looking hot. 2 rushing touchdowns. Cam Newton is back. He's against the Baltimore Ravens this week. Let's lower those expectations tremendously. No top 10 quarterback for Cam Newton this week. In fact, I'm putting him way down as like a low-end quarterback 2 on the week. So that means you can play him in 2 quarterback leagues, but you shouldn't even think about him in 1 quarterback leagues. I don't want anything to do with Cam Newton if possible this week against the Baltimore Ravens. Cam Newton, your fallback boy for week 10. My bold prediction this week, Kareem Hunt outscores his average this week now that Nick Chubb is back. All right, so that might be a little confusing, but listen, Kareem Hunt had an opportunity to show us all he is running back 1 worthy without Nick Chubb. Chubb got hurt in week 5, so starting in week 6, it was the Kareem Hunt show. He averaged 13.5 fantasy points during those 4 games without Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb should be back this week, and to me, that makes Kareem Hunt better. Kareem Hunt will outscore that 13.5 fantasy point average that he had without Nick Chubb. Kareem Hunt's better with Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb is probably better with Kareem Hunt. These two guys feed off each other. Look for both of them to be top 12 running backs in week 10. And hear me out. It's time to start thinking about the playoffs. All right, I'm a player. I carry one defense throughout the regular season. I stream my defenses every single week, probably starting a different defense. But this is the time I can get a second defense on my roster. Know when your playoffs are. Okay, this is all going to be about roster construction in 3 leagues. For me, I'm in 3 leagues that start the playoffs in week 12. They're 2-week matchups at a time. So week 12 and 13, we combine the points. That's our round 1 matchup. So I, in those 3 leagues, need to start thinking about those playoffs this week because they're 2 weeks away. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for good quarterback matchups, good defense matchups. If you've been streaming quarterbacks and defenses like I usually do, put 2 of them on your roster at this point, and know what those matchups are going to be down the road. So week 13 I'm playing this quarterback, and I'm going to pick him up now because I know he plays a bad defense in week 13 during the playoffs. Right? Those playoffs are right around the corner. Whether it's a week 12 start or if you do single weeks and it starts week 14, they're right around the corner. Your roster should start shaping and molding right now to be prepared for those playoffs. That looks like handcuff running backs, right? Maybe a second defense, maybe that second quarterback. You don't need these guys you've been waiting around on all season long that aren't producing. Look, I loved Cam Akers. I thought he was going to be good. He doesn't need to be on my roster anymore because I need to get a second quarterback on there, or I need to get a handcuff running back on there. If I don't have Dalvin Cook, I don't need to hold on to Alexander Mattison anymore. He doesn't do my roster any good. Instead, if I have a Alvin Kamara, I need to get Latavius Murray on my roster. Start handcuffing running backs. I told you guys that weeks and weeks ago. Now it's all about the playoffs. Get rid of those flyers that you've been waiting on all season. It's going to get into roster construction mode. Make sure your roster is ready for those playoffs. Let me give you an example of something I've done this week to start preparing for my playoffs. I picked up the Los Angeles Rams in our Fleetwood Mac League. And that playoffs don't start till week 15. It's only 2 weeks. Week 15, week 16. Only 4 teams make the playoffs. But the Los Angeles Rams face the New York Jets in week 15. So I'm not going to be using the Los Angeles Rams defense for the next couple of weeks. But when I'm in the playoffs, what better defense than to play the team that's playing the New York Jets in week 15? I'm prepared for that game already right now. That's how you get prepared for your playoffs. You need to go and start looking at your quarterbacks and defenses most specifically, as those are your 2 most streamable options. Try to make sure your roster construction is ready to go for your playoffs, as I hope all of you are in the playoffs this season. Good luck in week 10. Hopefully you get that win, get one step closer to those playoffs. And as always, don't overtinker.